Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Now that I am free from my dad's grasps, as it were, I can actually get on with stuff. But I've got one of these lovely little zoo, or is it goo, Zillionaire cheesecakes. Because my HelloFresh meal comes with two of these. So having one here now, of one probably tomorrow. That's not why you called. No. It's time for that weekly session of reading this book, but first I need to finish this thing. You know what the problem with those things is, though? They go too fucking quick, let me tell you. It feels like 1 minute it's there, and then the next, it's gone. In my case, usually about 20-30 seconds, but I digress. Anywho, time to read the book again. So we're continuing off, if I recall correctly, from page 241, right at the very top, since the other page just came to a stop. So, with programmable money, they can make you spend it or make you save it. Why would they want to do that? Because the oligarchy see themselves as managing the economy, just as they see themselves as managing the climate of the planet. Rather than play with other less precise levers of the economy, for example, the interest rates, the tax thresholds, the tax rates, etc., etc., they can simply say, if you do not spend 17% of the money in your account, it is going to be disabled. You cannot spend more than 1% of the money in your account per month for the next 12 months. Or you cannot do that in the next 12 months. You think they wouldn't do things like this? Let us remind you of when the oligarchy ended the gold standard to prolong World War I. Or when in the USA the oligarchy made the public hand in their wealth stored in gold coins, then suddenly devalued that money, robbing the public who had complied. Or the change in banking laws across the West in 2009, where in future bank crises, the banks can just take the money from customers and give them possibly worthless shares in a bank, or the bank. The people of Britain didn't just have food and petrol rationing from the 1940s until the 50s, they had price and wage controls in the 60s and 70s. So there's plenty of evidence of the oligarchy deploying these cruder types of financial repression before. Some years ago, we came across what seemed to be an insane economist named Silvio Gesell. His views was that banknotes should effectively have a use-by date. If you didn't spend your banknotes for goods within a certain number of months, they would have no value. It sounds like an insane scheme, right? Well, once again, it's important to pay attention to history. As we mentioned above, World War I, inspired by the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, there was a Bolshevik Revolution in Germany which established a Soviet Republic. Remember, Hitler was an elected representative to the Soviet government. This Soviet Republic in Bavaria offered him, Gesell, a seat on the Socialization Commission and then appointed him the People's Representative of Finances. So clearly leftists didn't find his ideas insane. Just a few years ago, the leftist broadcaster National Public Radio, NPR, in America was explaining Gesell's ideas with a description of him as a strange, unduly neglected prophet in 2019. And as the leftist NPR goes on to say, and I quote, after 70 years of obscurity, Gesell is making a comeback. All of a sudden, this obscure, radical from another age has his name and ideas popping up in unlikely places. Like speeches of leaders at the US Federal Reserve, research papers of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the pages of the Financial Times. End quote. So the oligarchy is rehabilitating Gesell a century after he was the finance minister of the Soviet Republic, of which Hitler was also a member. Why do you think that is? Because now his idea of currency that can be directly controlled by the oligarchy is in the offing. It's not as if the famous economists who came after Gazelle didn't like his ideas. The economics of Lord Keynes has dominated the last century, and in Keynes' most famous book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, Keynes said that Gazelle's time-limited money, which we thought was an insane idea, was a good idea. Other economists have pointed out that so much of Keynes' monetary outlook is closely aligned with Gazelle's that the resemblance is more than uncanny. Just to illustrate how profoundly did the oligarchy like Keynesian economics, Richard Nixon ended the gold standard in 1971, and just a few weeks before ending the gold standard, Nixon stated, "We're all Keynesians now." The Republican president who created a financialized globalist economy had become an avowed statist Keynesian. And since Keynes was a Fabian socialist who admired Gazelle, it should be no surprise that Gazelle's ideas are now imminent. The National Socialists also liked Gazelle's idea, as the NPR article promoting Gazelle as a neglected prophet says, and I quote, "In our technological age, a gazillion system of unhoardable cash wouldn't actually have to involve stamping paper bills for a fee. It could involve high-tech physical cash." End quote. I need a moment. Yawning something awful. Actually, that reminds me, have I had my coffee? In fact, I know what the answer to that is. No, I put it in the fucking bread bin. Out of sight, out of mind. And going colder even faster than in my hand when I put it on the fucking ice pack for burning my hand on a handle of the pan that I was cooking with. Anyway, where were we? Of course, no one is spelling out to the public that this is what the cryptocurrency, CBDCs, and stroke number 2, programmable money, and truly imply. God, this is not looking good. So, it won't just be a question of the oligarchy telling you how and when to spend and save. There will... God, I'm struggling. They will be able to tell you that you can or must spend your money on a certain category of goods in a specific week. Ugh, cold coffee. Awful. He says as he takes another sip. The oligarchy will be able to decide that certain mascot groups will pay lower prices for the same goods that cost you more. The implications of programmable money are staggering. As for dissenters, they will have no bank accounts and no money. Cash will no longer exist. Maybe you cannot believe the oligarchy want to herd you in this way. So let's consider taxation and inflation. When the oligarchy want to ensure the house prices remain high, they remove taxes on house purchases. When they want to control consumption of alcohol or tobacco, they increase taxes. To change your behaviour because of the myth of climate change, they increase taxes on fuel and air travel, and other such things. They shape your behaviour through criminal laws, civil penalties, taxation. Why wouldn't they use programmable money to control your behaviour? People were locked out of their bank accounts for donating to a protest against the compulsory vaccinations. And so were the Canadian truckers as well, if I recall correctly. They had their bank accounts frozen. Something to bear in mind. I actually didn't even realise this was the full thing. Vaccinations ordered by the SS applauding Canadian Liberal government. Electric vehicles are being programmed to stop working if the person in charge drives over the flag of a mascot group which the state has painted on the road. We had to cross-check that last item, as it sounded too insane to be true. So that, I guess, is basically implying that they actually tested running over a flag of a mascot group in order to test whether or not it's correct. That's fucking scary. Just imagine the power and control programmable currency will give to the oligarchy with their divisive collectivism and the tribal conflict they are provoking with mascot groups and the policy of population replacement. See Chapter 5. It won't be the assets of the oligarchy that are controlled using programmable money. It will just be us farmed animals. We pointed out earlier how the socialist economist Keynes has been the single dominant force in welfare state economics in the past century. In the years following World War I, Keynes said about inflation, and I quote, "By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. By this method, they not only confiscate, but they confiscate arbitrarily, and while the process impoverishes many, it actually enriches some. As the inflation proceeds and the real value of the currency fluctuates wildly from month to month, all permanent relations between debtors and creditors, which form the ultimate foundation of capitalism, become so utterly disordered as to be almost meaningless. There is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and does it in a manner which one man in a million is able, not one man in a million is able to diagnose." End quote. Since the major economist of the oligarchy was saying this over a century ago, let us ask you a question. Do you think the oligarchy don't understand the writings of the economists who they use to justify the welfare state economics? Stroke number 3, economics of the past century. Now ask yourself, why is he having a stroke every 4 minutes? No, sorry, why does every government in the West want inflation? Why do they always talk about having a target of 2% inflation? They invented this policy, basically, on the basis of no sound economic reasoning. It's purely political. The policy was invented in New Zealand in 1989, and now all the government states it as if it was law from God. Once set, it's virtually gospel among central banks. Canada and England soon adopted 2% as their inflation target, as did other central banks. The Federal Reserve never adopted an official numeric target during the period in which so many other central banks did so. The 2% target was officially adopted by the US Central Bank in January 2012. Of course, the oligarchy propagandists don't question it. The left doesn't make it a point of Stroke number 4, opposition! I am so going to end up reaching another fucking record at this rate. Why not 0% inflation? Why not minus 2% inflation? Wouldn't the public prefer that everything got a little cheaper every year rather than a little more expensive? I know I would. Keynes pointed out that every year the government can confiscate and secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. So 2% of your money is worth 2% less each year. No, sorry, I've read that wrong. 2% inflation means your money is worth 2% less each year. Imagine you keep your wealth as banknotes under the mattress for a decade. At the end of the decade, you've lost at least 20% of the value of your wealth. You can buy 20% less with it. What can you do to protect your wealth you worked for? Put it in a deposit account at the bank, where if you are lucky, you will earn 2% interest. Now the banks have your wealth, which they can lend out, or they can gamble within another part of the financial casino. Hopefully, you understand why governments want inflation. It's to make you put your money where the oligarchy can use it to fund the transformation of your country, or so they can gamble within order to make themselves richer. Don't believe us? Here's the oligarchy talking among themselves, saying without inflation, and I quote, "The problem is that the value of money would increase when people do nothing with it. This would be problematic since people would not invest or spend money to get the country out of a recession when they could just get a return from doing nothing." End quote. They want inflation to make you gamble with your money or to make you spend it. The oligarchy are farming you to manage the economy, and they are doing this at an international level. Hence, they all have targets of 2% inflation. Not so high you notice you are being robbed by their policies devaluing your wealth, but high enough to keep you investing or spending. Their money bubble must be kept inflated. And don't forget, since World War II, the oligarchy have been periodically redefining inflation so they could underreport the rate of inflation. So really, any money you do not spend or do not gamble is losing far more than 2% every year. With gambling, sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. And I know that all too fucking well, especially with the actual gambling I did in the past. And don't you worry, I have kept clean from that shit, with the odd scratch card or two as an exception. But it is literally like every now and again. I'm not going in and going like, hey, can I have 5 scratch cards? Or I'll have one on Monday and I'll have one on Friday. It'll be like in dribs and drabs. Anywho, where are we? The crude measures they use to control your behaviour, criminal law, civil penalties, taxation, inflation, interest rates, etc., are going to be unnecessary when they have programmable money. Fabian socialists, National Socialists, and the communists all like Gazelle's idea of programmable money. They just couldn't implement it. Now INGSOC, of the English Fabian Socialism, can implement programmable money. INGSOC is the ideology of the oligarchy. Big Brother really will control you and know everything you do. We're not giving you financial advice. We are trying to warn you of the likely economic and political events that are just a few years away. You should be wary of anyone who has a financial asset they recommend you put money into. Kind of reminds me, let me tell you a little story very briefly. There was a couple of people who saw me on my old channel who I was wandering around Norwich city centre, and I think I was around Tombland area, and I'd just gone past, I think it was the school or like church or something, as I was going up to Tombland. There was a couple of people who were subscribers of mine who ended up coming up to me, and they were actually suggesting that I invest in Bitcoin. Now, I listened to what they had to say, and I didn't really try to get too engrossed into it, as I did not know anything about this cryptocurrency, basically. And for me, it was something that I really wasn't sure of whether or not I should go into it, so I decided, on good faith, I can't really dive into something if I don't have any experience of it. So, there's a little story for you about the finance side of things, about someone trying to get me into Bitcoin. But, yeah, basically, I don't really like to do that shit because I don't know a lot about it. I'm sure there will be some people who will be interested in cluing me in on that shit, but not right now. We've got a book to read. So, but you do not need to start thinking about the mechanism by which the oligarchy herd you and farm you. We don't have anything to sell you. We don't have any recommendations. All we can do is put the information before you and say, don't be complacent, but do be skeptical. Well, I guess I showed that. The public need to wake up and behave like adults. Understand that the oligarchy do not have the stroke number 5. Man alive. What was it? The information. The oligarchy do not have the interests of the public at heart. The oligarchy are only interested in power. Never forget, they believe they can control the climate, putting increased taxes on you driving your car because of climate change, whilst they fly around in their private jets. The people, the demos of democracy, need to take power from the oligarchy before it's too late. That is chapter 4 done. We're getting close to the end now, folks. And is this the last chapter? I think it is. Oh no, there is one more after that. So, we now move on to 20 minutes in, to Chapter 5, Population Replacement. So we're going from page 244 to 267. In recent years, the state-controlled media of the oligarchy claims that the population replacement in the West is a far-right conspiracy theory. But the truth is that long before 2041, the indigenous people of Britain will be a minority in England. See Appendix 1. That's right, in less than a generation, the British will be a minority in England. Perhaps the English are already a minority there. The oligarchy choose not to record statistics for that ethnic identity in the census. At the time of writing this book, it is 15 years since Tommy Robinson created the English Defence League. Within another 15 years, the white British will be the minority in England. Let that sink in. As The Guardian said in the year 2000, it will be the first time in history that a major indigenous population has voluntarily become a minority. That actually says that, I believe, on the back of this book. Let's see if I can get that. Yeah, it's in reverse, but it definitely says that there. But anywho, where were we? To the oligarchy with their fake liberal democracy, you all chose for your nation to be exterminated by your lords and masters. It's nearly a decade since a leftist writer wrote a book on his time spent mixing with immigrants in London, where it was estimated that 1 in 10 of the adults in London was an illegal immigrant, and obviously illegal immigrants are not even counted in official demographic data. The left loved this book, or his book rather, because of the sympathy for some 600,000 illegal immigrants, and that's the ones that we are being told about. We will show you below that population replacement is the official policy of the oligarchy, but the victims of their policy are not allowed to object to it. The Muslim mayor of London, aka Sadiq terrorist sympathiser Khan, is proud that there are more than 300 languages spoken in London, more than any other city in the world, but you will struggle to find a white Londoner whose parents were born in London. As long as a decade ago, £140 million of taxpayer money was spent on annual translation services. Just one government department provides services in Britain in 165 languages, providing translations at taxpayers' expense. Amongst the languages it offers is Pidgin in English, which is the native tongue of an estimated only 2% of Nigeria's population. Money for the 2% of Nigerians who speak Pidgin English, but as soon as, I am not calling him sir, Keir the traitor Starmer's Socialist Party became the government, they announced that winter fuel payments for pensioners were to be abolished. I think that was the letterbox. We can expect that the cost of these translation services is now above £200 million annually. 25 years ago, Peter McLaughlin was witness to a lengthy criminal trial where every question and response was translated between English and a foreign language, yet the witnesses, the alleged victim, and the accused had all been living in England for years, but all claimed not to speak English. How much worse is that situation now with the additional 13 million immigrants who have arrived here in the past 25 years, legal or otherwise? We point out in Chapter 4 that the oligarchy have spent the past century manipulating the economy and the financial system in order to fool the masses into believing the oligarchy were concerned about our welfare. But before getting into detail concerning their plan to replace the population of Europe, let's examine further evidence of how they put their pieces into play on the grand chessboard of geopolitics. When the UK joined the European Economic Community, the EEC, which was basically what the European Union was known as originally back in the 1968, I believe, or was it 1970s? Can't remember off the top of my head. But I think it was 1968 when it was founded. Anyway, it was under the when the UK joined the European Union, it was under the guise of it being a trade agreement, the common market. Subsuming the UK into this common market was done with no referendum, no input from the public. In 1970, a Gallup poll showed that only 15% of the British electorate were in favour of a further bid to join the common market. The Socialist Party won the election that year, and the party manifesto contained only one line on the subject, saying they intended to negotiate no more, no less. And in 1970, or the 1970s election, the winning Socialist Party got power based on the votes of a mere 33% of the electorate. See Appendix 8. But 2 weeks after the election, the government immediately sent senior ministers to negotiate with the EEC. And within 3 years, Britain became a member of the EEC with no electoral approval at all. Since such massive constitutional change can happen on so little political stroke number 6, political discussion. People really should have paid attention to the anti-democratic plans for population replacement being openly discussed by the oligarchy at the turn of the last century. Did I say stroke 6 or 7? It's supposed to be 6. This socialist treachery in the early 1970s should serve as proof that the oligarchy will set about massive political and constitutional projects without any concern for approval by the electorate. Prior to the 1970 general election, the leader of the Socialist Party, Edward Heath, said that Parliament would need the full-hearted consent of the electorate. Then, with no consent, the oligarchy proceeded to bring about the biggest constitutional change in centuries. You better believe they have as little respect for democracy when it comes down to the project of population replacement. We should also expect Keir the traitor Starmer to set about merging the UK back into the anti-democratic EU. I mean, I've already been saying this for the longest fucking time, so it's no real surprise to me. The deception of the British people about the oligarchy's plans for the EU is worse than most people could conceive. The oligarchy had been openly discussing among themselves the creation of a United States of Europe since the end of World War I. In 1924, Count Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi published his book Pan-Europa. This aristocrat's idea took off, supported by the great and the good. Businessmen and left-wingers joined the cause. The idea of a United States of Europe was endorsed by Winston Churchill in 1925, with the proviso that Britain would not be joining it. In 1930, Edward Herriot, is a leftist Prime Minister of France 3 times between 1924 and 32, published the book The United States of Europe. In 1931, Arthur Salter published a collection of essays in a book of the same title in which he argued that the United States of Europe would have a secretariat, of a council of ministers, an assembly, a parliament, and a court. The secretariat would be the permanent body of the international civil servants, loyal to the new organisation, not to the member countries. If you know the basic structure of the EU organisations, you can see that the political power organisation of the EU, as the United States of Europe, was laid out by 1931. Salter even used the phrase European Commission, which is what the Secretariat ended up being called. Arthur Salter went on to be a professor of political theory at Oxford University, and then became a member of Parliament. So he became a member of treachery, basically. Far from being a nobody, he was at the heart of the oligarchy. 3 decades after the publication of Salter's book, his close friend and co-conspirator Jean Monnet, or is it Jean Monnet? You know what I mean. Anyway, would put forward Salter's structure as the structure for the new EEC. Whilst Monnet was ostensibly setting up a coal and steel confederation before covertly setting up the United States of Europe in 1957, he had come to fame for his Soviet-style General Planning Commission in France. In 1958, British aristocrat and fascist Sir Oswald Mosley published his book Europe, Faith and Plan, promoting the pan-European idea. Mosley boldly advocated what the anti-democratic oligarchy were covertly implementing. The complete union of Europe with an SIC, European government, is now a necessity. Both the arrangements made by the 6 centuries for the gradual introduction of a common market and the even slower and more hesitant methods proposed by the government of Britain. Mosley had a habit of coming out and advocating explicitly in public what the rest of the oligarchy were planning and doing in private. But you probably never even heard of socialist state planner Monet. But across Europe there are statues of Monet, squares named in his honour, there's half a dozen institutions named after him, and nearly 30 universities have professorships in his name. The oligarchy makes sure to commemorate those who serve its interests, even if 99% of the people of these United States of Europe could not tell you who Jean Monnet was. That, the international oligarchy, a cabal of academics, capitalists, politicians, trade unionists, etc., should have planned and schemed for decades. Prepared to deceive and to bypass the democratic control, should have woken the public up. But the public ensured the intention of the masses is diverted into entertainment and the puppet theatre of parliamentary democracy, while in the background of the oligarchy spends decades rearranging society. The masses across Europe were not exhibiting a democratic yearning for the United States of Europe. The new anti-democratic political reality was to be imposed on them from above by the oligarchy. The Parliament of the European Union didn't exist as an assembly elected by the people until 1979, and generally fewer than half of the Europeans bothered to vote for this pointless pretense at democracy. The EU is ruled by the European Commission, each commissioner swearing an oath of loyalty to the EU above all other loyalties. The people of Europe, the demos, get no say in who will be given the job in this unelected committee ruling over all 450 million EU citizens. So think about what I've been saying about the unelected bureaucrats in Brussels, basically. Fascist rule came to the whole of Europe, but instead of a single unelected dictator, or maybe I was right first time, it now has a committee of unelected dictators. The commission literally ruled by diktat, known as directives, a word which is synonymous with order, command, decree, or diktat. The EU Parliament is just there to give their corporate rule an appearance of democracy. Provided the oligarchy can make the masses believe that fascism involves men with moustaches, military forms, and silly walks, then the oligarchy can implement their corporate socialism and their racist policy of population replacement with little to no opposition. In Europe's Full Circle, Corporate Elites and the New Fascism by Rodney Atkinson, the brother of a scientist, free speech advocate and comedian Rowan Atkinson, and we should know him all too well, bloody good actor, Blackadder. Anyway, the book highlights the fascistic nature of Britain's political parties and of the European Union, saying, the coercive power of the state and collectives supported by the state are as attractive to corporatist, i.e. non-individual, capitalists as they are to socialists. This social and economic fascism brings about political and military fascism. In his later book, Fascist Europe Rising, 2001, he even gives even more details about the connections between stroke number 7, fascism and the... Where am I? That EXE is not working. Between fascism and Europe's pro-EU elites. I skipped a paragraph for whatever reason. Anyway, given his analysis, it's hardly surprising that the USA, UK and EU should support national socialist coups in Ukraine, leading to war between Ukraine and Russia. The oligarchy of the EU spent decades planning to Islamize Europe, importing Muslims and lying to the people of Europe about the doctrines and history of violent Islamic supremacism. The money that the oligarchy extract from taxation, borrowing, and money printing enables them to perform demographic and civilizational changes that no electorate in Europe has ever approved. See the details of the EU meetings and documents in the book Eurabia by Batty Yor. She didn't invent the word Eurabia. It is the word the oligarchy invented to describe their multi-decade project of merging Europe with North Africa. And I think that'll be all for today's reading. I know I've been doing my reading sessions a little lower in the duration, but I think we're getting close to the end now. Like, there are not many pages to this at all. There is, like, 344 pages in this, and we're on now page 271. So there's only about 7 or 8 more sessions of this, if even that. And this book's finished. But we will continue next time on page 271 with 5.1, which is eco-fascism and mass shootings. And with that, folks, I wish you all a good morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are in the world. I'll thank you one last time for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye-bye for now.